This is the download recap from Sounds Profitable, the most important news from this week and why it matters to people in the business of podcasting. I'm Gavin Gaddis, back for the final episode of 2025. The download recap is brought to you by Podscribe. You can find out more at podscribe.com. This week, The Inventory and the Scale by Tom Webster. How OGs dominate podcast ad performance and video podcasting's Achilles heel. Netflix's deals this week, and 3 podcasting trends Signal Hill Insight saw from surveying 66,000 podcast consumers this year. Let's get started. If one does not proactively shape the creator landscape, its audiences will never follow. Tom Webster's final newsletter of 2025 hits on some concerning data from the Creators 2025 report. Of current podcast consumers, 15% of men are creating podcasts. That number is just 8% for women. 17% of 18 to 34-year-olds are creating, while just 4% of Americans age 55 plus are creating podcasts. A quote from the article, quote, "I've seen this dynamic play out in another world I care about, magic. Magic remains overwhelmingly male. Go to a show at the Magic Castle in Los Angeles, and you'll see a room full of dudes with decks of cards doing card tricks for other dudes. Why? It's not because women can't do sleight of hand, it's structural. For 2 centuries, women were portrayed as assistants to male magicians rather than magicians themselves. The traditional uniform of a magician, jacket and pants with plenty of pockets, is designed for concealment in a way that dresses are not. And perhaps most importantly, there's been a lack of successful female role models a woman can identify with. Not just successful people, but successful people like them." End quote. In addition to those entry barriers discouraging various communities from joining podcasting in the first place, we're also churning out the ones we do get. Both LGBTQ plus and 55 plus creators have a 40% churn rate. They didn't bounce off before becoming creators. They tried and then left. Tom Webster reflects on a Garth Brooks story he heard at a conference that back in the day, songwriters looking to make a living in the country music world could make it in Nashville by securing the 4th single on a big star's album. It might not be the single that gets a ton of radio play, but it would be on an overall album that would carry it far enough to pay the bills and keep that person creating. Now, in the streaming era of music, there is no such thing as a 4th single on a Travis Tritt album. The format of the album itself is existentially hazy, as music lives and dies by individual singles on streaming platforms. Podcasting has constructed itself in such a way it replicates the same problem. We celebrate our huge successes, but there aren't many intentionally built pathways to modest, sustainable success that keeps new creators afloat long enough to build their audience, something that becomes doubly difficult when one is in a demographic that, by virtue of being a minority group, will have a harder time of finding its wide audience quickly. Webster's challenge to the business of podcasting is simple. Put your thumb on the scale. Fund creators in high-risk categories. Proactively fund and work with those in those demographics to best reach the audience not being served and support the creators from those audiences to begin with. Oxford Road has had a busy week for research. First up, a new Orbit report focuses on the top 15 performing OG podcasts. These are podcasts defined by having launched their show before March of 2020, when COVID-19 lockdowns led to the podcasting equivalent of a baby boom. Top findings include execution outlasting hype, as 75% of the top performers in podcasting launched pre-pandemic. The success of these shows stems not from flash-in-the-pan virality back when they started in, say, 2015, but consistent delivery on high production values. OG podcasts come with a 12% efficiency premium as well, with multi-year listener relationships effectively building armor around the podcast that brand new listeners can't easily replicate. And with that protective shell of old head listeners comes lower discovery costs and increased stickiness to the show's advertising. Flashing forward a couple of days, the Wall Street Journal published a piece looking at a new white paper published by Oxford Road and Podscribe called Rethinking YouTube: Why Your Video Podcast Ads Are Converting 25% Worse than audio. As the title spoils, YouTube views prove to be 18 to 25% less effective at converting sales than an RSS audio download of a similar ad. Which makes sense given the challenges facing classic host-read baked-in ads on YouTube. Even traditional YouTubers face sponsorship issues, as earlier this year, the commonly skip segment feature made it so many YouTube premium viewers can simply tap their remote twice to skip the exact length of a sponsored segment, the nuclear equivalent of podcasting's, I would argue, over-feared 30-second skip button. The Rethinking YouTube white paper comes with a 10-step guide on adjusting to the reality of baked-in YouTube ads and how to treat RSS audio data in comparison to YouTube views, since, as the report shows, the two are not one-to-one exchangeable in terms of audience conversion. Podcasting's been hearing a few to-dums around this week as the big red N has been signing deals. First up, the Ankler scooped details of the reported nearly finalized deal between Netflix and iHeartMedia. According to reporter Natalie Jarvie, sources, the deal is being struck to take around 20 of iHeartMedia's popular video podcasts, including The Breakfast Club and Stuff They Don't Want You to Know, behind the Netflix paywall. There has been no official word from either Netflix or iHeartMedia onto whether this proposed batch of shows is heading to reportedly timed exclusivity early next year. Then came Barstool Sports. As Hollywood Reporter covered earlier this week, the streamer has signed a multi-year deal with Barstool Sports, which includes bringing 3 of the company's most popular sports video podcasts, including Pardon My Take, to Netflix. This includes both new episodes and select library episodes. Mondo Metrics founder Nick Cicero argues this isn't necessarily a podcast move, it's a daily sports attention move. Netflix wants to build daily viewership, something video podcasts, especially sports-focused podcasts, are good at, creating habits. Also, investing in sports fandom is a great way to build out the sports side of a streamer's catalog without the expense of paying for the rights to stuff like broadcasting games live. By investing in show fans listen to about their favorite team, companies like Netflix can own the conversation between the games. Instead of generating your own water cooler moments, you can just invest in the water cooler itself. For our final top story of this episode, over 2025, Signal Hill Insights has surveyed 29% more media consumers than last year, reaching 86,000 total surveyed. Looking back over the year's research, company president Paul Riesmandel collects 3 big moments worth remembering. I'm only going to spoil the last one, as it's a big lesson worth remembering for podcasting in general. Expect surprises. Smart TVs became the second most used device for podcast consumption with weekly podcast consumers. French-Canadian podcast consumption bounced back from a 1-year decline to hit a new high. The political identity of the average U.S. podcast consumer flipped from 2024, likely due to politically charged influencers with podcasts doing a good job evangelizing the concept of podcasts to their audience, not just driving them to listen to their show. With all of that said, Paul Riesmandel ends out the piece with a sentiment I think is a good one to ruminate on during our final recap of the year. Quote, "The biggest lesson of all, don't get too comfortable, but having the research and insights will make you prepared." End quote. It's time for the final quick hits of the year. A reminder, quick hits are articles that I've covered from throughout the week that you should include in your weekend reading. I just couldn't fit them in with all the top stories. So first up, On Air Fest has announced a slew of new guests, like way too many for me to list, and speakers for their February festival in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Early bird ticket prices run through January 5th, so get to reserving now. Friend of the pod, Crime Writers On, has published their list of the best true crime podcasts of 2025, topped by Bone Valley Season 3, Spotlight Snitch City from the Boston Globe, and Tenderfoot TV's Wisecrack. Right Side Up director Lindsay Piper Shaw has debuted a case study they ran with Fabric by Gerber Life, tracking the brand's journey with podcast advertising since 2021. And finally, Amplify Media founder and longtime appearer in the Download, Stephen Goldstein, has written a new blog about the liquid content era of podcasting, where podcasts have become a form of storytelling more than a specific format. That was the Download Recap, brought to you by Sounds Profitable and Podscribe. I went through today's stories as fast as usual, so make sure to click the link in your show notes. That'll take you to today's episode post where you can find the links to everything I just talked about. As usual, I'm Gavin Gaddis. Our producers are myself, Brian Barletta, and Tom Webster. Special thanks to you for sticking with me as I brought you all the top stories from this past week in the business of podcasting, as well as all the other hundreds of stories over the past year. Robot?
Download complete.